I guess I should start by saying this happened in early September of 2016. I'm a 25-year-old female that lives in a really rural part of northern Arkansas with my fiance. Near the lake to be exact. It's gorgeous. Lots of open farmland, plenty of woods, and barely any neighbors. It's what my soul always wanted. I am an only child, also, and have been pretty much spoiled my whole life. My father, for as long as I can remember, would randomly bring home toys. Not just little toys, I'm talking go-karts, dune buggies, and even four-wheelers. So, since I was young, I knew how to drive just about any off-road vehicle, and I loved it. We even had jet skis at one point. My parents were very laid back with me, to the point that they would nap during the day and let me ride the dune buggies until dark. I forgot to mention, I just recently moved full-time to the property. For years, we would only visit the land on the weekends, so it's a different feeling knowing you don't have to go back to town. My parents live about 3 hours away from the land, so seeing them on the weekend is a treat. They bring up all kinds of goodies. The land is beautiful, about 30 acres more than half of which is cleared. Years ago, a small farm was here. The old barn still stands, and of course a pond with a ton of frogs. One night, we all got wild hair and decided to go for a night ride. My father now has a Jeep, so him and my fiance decided to ride together. Me and my mother decided to ride separate on the wheelers. These four-wheelers are fairly new, automatic, so they are ready to ride a while. And damn it, I also forgot to mention that for miles outside of the property is the Cherokee Wildlife Reservation. So there are miles and miles of woods and dirt trails. So many that you could be gone all night. Behind the property, about 20 minutes out, is a creek. Once you pass through it, you would go up the mountain on the other side of Cherokee. There's also a crap ton of logging roads. But before you get to the logging trails, there's a dirt road you have to take. I have taken this road for years. I have had some weird feelings out there, but this night will be the night that I will always remember until I die. My dad, fiance, uncle, and aunt had gone ahead of us, 5 minutes ahead of us to be exact. My mother and I had been out making a drink. Yes, my wheeler was a cup holder, and I was gonna bring alcohol with me, damn it. After we passed through the creek and up the mountain, I noticed the beams of my mother's wheeler start to dim. Normally, they do this because your fan 2 cool engine has kicked on, so I didn't think anything of it. I want to let you know that there are houses near the end of this road and near the beginning, so there's a gap of about 5 miles long of woods, and an occasional dirt road for gas as well. By the way, gas wells are everywhere up here. As we get closer to the trail we are supposed to take, my mother's wheeler starts backfiring. We stop for a second to see what's going on. When it dies. Now, like I said, I've been out in these woods my whole life. I wasn't afraid at all. No weird things, or feelings, or anything. My mother calls to my dad and tells him what's going on, but no calls are getting through. They must be going down the mountain, my mother said with an aggravated tone. I turn off my wheeler, but leave the lights on. The road is narrow, so narrow that 2 cars can barely squeeze by. I don't want some drunk guy flying around the corner and not seeing us. As my mother tries calling my dad again, I start looking at her wheeler. Something isn't right with it. There's power to it, but no fuel is getting to the engine, which could be a lot of things causing that. So I get my phone out and text my fiance, letting him know we were stuck in the middle of the road. We were sitting there for a good 10 minutes, when all the hairs on my body start to stand up. I immediately look in the direction of the headlights, to see a man walking from the pitch darkness. He had no light, and he said nothing. It took a second for my brain to register what I was seeing. As my mother finally got my dad on the phone, I whispered to her sternly, "Mom, there's a guy walking up on us." Now, my mother tends to panic at times. I never took my eyes off him. He was still far enough away that I couldn't make out much features. My mother's freaking out and I tell her to leave the shit and jump on my four-wheeler. As she does, I yell to the guy who was obviously getting closer, "Hello, what the hell?" He said nothing. This seriously freaked me out. Like, who the hell walks down a pitch dark road in the middle of the night without a light? And not say something as you approach other strangers. That's when it dawned on me. He must have been creeping in the woods down the road. Voices echo like crazy out there, so he probably knew we were women. Normally, I keep a 38 on me, but my silly ass left it at home. Out of all times, this would be the one time that I forgot it. I start my wheeler up and my mother hops on. The man is still getting closer. Now I can make out a red flannel shirt and dirty jeans, dark hair, but not much more. He had a gun. Not in his hand, but visible on his hip. He still isn't saying a word, which makes us kind of panic even more. He also was not looking at us, but rather at the ground. I realize I can't back up because I can't see a damn thing behind us. So I threw in high and took off past him. As we passed him, he just stood there, facing and following our direction, yet never looking up at us. It was pretty disturbing. We make it news through the creek, and my mother was able to tell my dad everything. He immediately turned around when he heard us shelling. He was at the wheeler in about 4 minutes. As we met back at the wheeler, the guy is there, on his own wheeler. My mother and I just sat there, staring at this weirdo. He never gave me or my mother eye contact, and ended up heading to the creek to talk. As we all shut our vehicles off, my dad asked us, "So, where did he come from?" I told him the darkness. He just walked up without a light from the road? My fiance chimes in. He had a wheeler and tow straps. Y'all didn't talk to him or anything? My mother and I just stared at him, with open mouths. This guy was going to take our wheeler. He never asked us if we needed help. He didn't say or do anything but act weird. The man had told my dad his wife it heard people yelling in their driveway. We didn't even pass their driveway. The next day, me and my fiance head to the same spot to check out this driveway. We reached just about halfway there when the four-wheeler had died, and just a few hundred yards down the road was an overgrown driveway. We drove up and decided to walk the rest of the way. Tucked far behind the woods was a rundown barn-like cabin, with no power, no vehicles, and no signs of recent life, and definitely no sign of a wife. There was an outhouse behind the barn. As we walked up to the windows, we noticed the man's wheeler sitting behind the barn. I looked at my fiance, who had a worried look on his face. Inside the barn was stuff that you would expect to see in a garage. No indication that someone was living there. As we backed away slowly, I started to notice that there were vans hidden in the woods, like a homestead. They were run down, and I'm pretty sure they didn't run, but still. And that's when my fiance grabbed my hand. We quickly got back to the Jeep. On the way back home, I told him about the vans. He said that he nursed them too. He noticed them at the same time he noticed the man staring at them from inside the barn. Always bring protection if you're going to be in the middle of nowhere. I live in northern New South Wales, Australia, in an area where the bush is quite dense. Now, I've always been into the paranormal and have experienced a few situations that just cannot be explained. The one I'm about to tell is the most freakiest one so far. So, here's a backstory that links into the story I'm about to tell. So, I live with my parents and my 2 brothers. About a year back, we were staying with some friends in a tiny desert town with a population of 200. I know, it is very tiny. We heard about an older man who lived in one of the houses and was murdered about 4 years back. The locals suspected the murderer to be a dodgy, dirty homeless man who was lingering around the children and just being completely and utterly creepy, so they kicked him out of the town. This man had a tattoo on his forehead saying, "Mom." Now, fast forward to when we were camping in the bush. We went for a drive on a day that I was going to have a shower in a place where you paid about $2 for a shower if you were camping close by. Anyway, we parked and noticed a man with a small puppy trying to hitchhike. Me, being a nice person, decided to ask him where he was going and let him know my father could probably drive him. Now, when I sit in my back passenger seat, it sometimes looks like I'm the one driving, So I'm assuming he thought I was alone, as he seemed perfectly fine at first, but then hesitant when he noticed our Rottweiler and the rest of my family. They gave him a lift while I had my shower. I don't know why, but I got a bad feeling. They took a little bit longer than usual. They came back in shock. It was the same fucking man with a tattoo on his head from that small town. We coincidentally bumped into this possible killer who was last seen in a complete different state 4 years ago. He was wearing a hat when I spoke to him, so I didn't see the tattoo. My parents told me how crazy bad the vibes were and how quiet everyone was. They even stopped and dropped him off at a public spot, so they did not feel that safe at all with him. Now, we are driving back to the camp and we're cracking jokes about how we would be waiting back at the camp for us with coffee. My family was terrible with a sense of humor. We got to the camp at light at night and it was dark. We had 2 big tents and we slept in a big kitchen tent. I was somehow still in a bit shaken sense, but I somehow decided to grab a knife and put it next to my bed, just in case. I was cleaning off my knife when I heard something walking behind the tent. I called out to my little brother, and he replied that he was in the campfire with everyone else, including the dog. I suddenly became very frightened. Without even thinking, looked next to me inside the food tent. And the only way I can describe it was that I seen this old, dirty man crouching down in the dark, breathing heavily and looking me dead in the eyes. I froze for a second and screamed like I have never before, and I began running to everyone else. I was getting ready to call the police, but once my dad walked in with a huge stick, it was like he just vanished. It was just like it didn't make sense. There was so much food in that tent that no one could have really been in it without crushing everything. Plus, nothing was even moved when we looked inside. When things settled down and we couldn't find anything around, we eventually all tried going to sleep. After about 10 minutes of trying to sleep, and still horrified from whatever the fuck I had just seen, I started hearing footsteps around the tent. It went on for about 5 minutes. I listened very carefully. This thing had 2 feet, and it sounded heavy and big. To try and possibly scare it off, I told my brother, very loudly, to grab the knife and see what's outside. Everyone else admitted to hearing it also. My dog started barking, and followed my brother outside. She then chased whatever it was into the forest. My brother couldn't see it, but he said it was running our dog, and it sounded as if it were dragging something heavy. After about 15 minutes, we tried going back to sleep. Just before I managed to get some sleep, a voice from outside very faintly said my dog's name. My dog didn't make a sound for the rest of the night. Now, I don't know if this had absolutely anything to do with that day, but I fell asleep that night in my face towards the tarp wall. I had the craziest vivid nightmare. I'll try to explain the nightmare as I can. It was like I was face to face with an autopsy of a young blonde American girl. She was speaking into my ear, going into details about how she was murdered, how her body was found, and how good her life was beforehand. I tried looking away from the body, but everywhere I turned my head, I was just looking at a different part of the body while she still spoke. This dream went on until she said a name of a man, and then I woke up. I don't remember the name, and it was not familiar to me. Anyway, that was probably the scariest, strangest night I have ever experienced, and I no longer enjoy camping. I hope you enjoyed my story as much as I enjoyed listening to everyone else's experiences. This story happened to me when I was hiking in the woods. It was about 3 a.m., so there was no light yet. There is rarely people up there and there are no trails. It's mostly trees and hills and wild cows. I was walking down a hill and I thought, why not do some exploring? So I decided to go down a few more hills until I was on flat ground. I looked around and saw what looked like a trailer. I decided to go into it. I had my gun in my hand, just in case some crazy bear or something tried to kill me. Anyway, when I was inside the trailer, I nearly threw up. It smelled like sulfur, but extremely bad. I walked further into it and saw a bed, a bag, and some books on black magic. Then I left because I couldn't stand that smell anymore. I left the trailer and continued walking. I came across a house. Well, maybe a bit bigger. I was like, why not go in there? And so I went in. I saw the same books and I was kind of creeped out. Then I went upstairs and saw that there was some stuff on the second floor. I heard something move. I got a terrible feeling of bad energy. Then I decided to yell for whatever reason at whoever was up there. I said, "I know you're up there, motherfucker. Say something." But there was complete silence. I shot my gun through the roof and, this time, heard a scuffle. The sun had started rising now, so I decided it was best to leave. Before I left, I saw something written on the stair. It said, "House of Spirits." I booked it out of there, and I felt the same feeling of being watched and scared. I turned around and there was a man on the roof. He was staring at me. He had a long beard and long hair. He was smiling at me, and I felt so disturbed. I shot at the man and yelled at him, but he kept smiling. I ran back to keep an eye on him, and I booked it into the truck. I always see that man around town, but I guess he doesn't recognize me. A few years have passed and my father's friends know him. He is always at the library. He gives everyone bad vibes and stuff, but I'm lucky to be alive. He was a devil worshipper and could have killed me, and no one would have known where to find our car. Anyway, I won't be going near their house again. This happened about 2 to 3 years ago. I live in northwestern Montana, and it was my senior year summer. And I was going through some personal stuff that year, and I thought the best way to escape from that was to get off the grid and go camping in the forest. My plan? To go on a hiking trail that not a lot of people hike on, and get to this small campsite. I packed my gear that everyone brings on hiking trips: food, water, tents, bear spray, etc. When I left, it was after work and it took a couple hours to reach the beginning of the trail. The hike was 10 miles into the forest, which had winding paths, rocky areas, and thick and overgrown brush that at times was hard to see the trail because of how overgrown the trail has been with the lack of people taking it. The trail just led you deeper into the mountains. The hike was pretty uneventful until I reached the campground. When you come out of the trail into the campground, the first thing you see is a small open area about 30 to 50 feet, just enough to hold a couple tents. And when you look in front, you can see a small lake with trees packed together tight, and it's hard to see through right above the Rocky Mountains, sticking up high in position to where the sun goes over. The surrounding area is covered in pine trees, making it hard to see more than 20 feet in front of you. When I reached the campground, I set up my tent right away because the sun was going down fast in the mountains. When I reached the campground, I set up my tent right away because the sun was going down fast, and with the mountains there, it grew dark quick, and since I have had nothing to eat, I got a fire going and put some food on. And here's where it starts to begin. Nightfall came. The night was calm, and just a small breeze was coming to make the trees just move enough to where it starts to make karaoke noises. The night was pretty chilly, and I made a pretty good fire. About an hour into the night, I got this foul smell that just seemed to linger around. It must have been coming from the wind, Pat, is what I thought anyway. But the smell was strong and felt like it was right next to me. I threw another log on the fire, and then I hear the scream of what sounded like a woman next to me coming from the direction where the wind was coming from. At least, I think. It freaked the hell out of me, because I thought I was the only person up here. I didn't see any other tents, and there's no place to set up tents other than the spot I'm in, and the scream didn't come from the trail I came from. The visibility that night came from the campfire and the moon reflecting off the lake, so I couldn't see far. But I reached into my backpack and pulled out a flashlight and just slowly started scanning the area for a woman. I yelled back, "Are you okay? What's wrong?" And the woman yelled back, "Help me." So I said, "Where are you? Are you hurt?" Trying to find the source of the sound. There was a small pause, and then She yelled back, "Come here." But there was something off about the voice. I just kept thinking to myself, that woman didn't sound like she was hurting or anything was really attacking her. So that raised a red flag in my mind, and everything I said seemed like it didn't matter to the woman. Like she was just trying to lure me out of the campsite with some 2 words. Help me. Right after that, I reached into my backpack and pulled out my handgun and kept scanning the forest. After a bit, I could hear far in the distance elk making noises, and right after the elk finished, I hear the loudest high-pitched screech that I've ever heard in my life, in the same direction the girl was yelling at me from, and after the screech I hear movement in the direction of the elk, with the bushes moving violently until the bushes became unmoving, and the campground came to a standstill again. After the thing ran away, the foul smell went with it, and though the rest of the night was calm except for the same screeching in the distance which sounded like it was miles away, just echoing through the mountains, I have never been more scared in my life. So, I waited until dawn, packed up my things, and headed home. I haven't told anyone my story, but if you have any idea what this could be, please let me know. For a while, I didn't really think much of this experience, because it seemed kind of stupid, and the person I originally told about it brushed it off, for which I don't really blame them. But after thinking about it for a while, I realized that what happened to me was just too real for me to brush off. So now, I am convinced that what happened was not normal. For some backstory, I live in the United States. My father and I are part of a local hunting club of about 10 or so people. This means that we share payment for the lease of the land with the other 10 members of the club, and in exchange are allowed to hunt anywhere on the 1,000-acre property. So, back in September or October of 2017, I was bow hunting deer on this property. I was sitting alone in a green box-shaped stand while my dad hunted a different part of the property. The stand I was sitting in looks over a medium-sized food plot. For those who don't know, a food plot is just an area used to grow plants that deer like to eat. The deer are attracted to plants, which brings them to your stand. To the right of the food plot is the dirt road used to get to the stand, which leads from the stand directly back to the parking area. Anyway, I was on an evening hunt and planning to sit there until I either shot a deer or could no longer see the plot at dusk. The hunt itself was uneventful. I didn't see or hear any deer. So, when it got dark, I packed up my gear, turned on my flashlight, and left the stand, walking back down the dirt road. However, this is when things got weird. I started hearing a sound in the woods to my left as I kept walking. It wasn't too loud, but it sounded pretty close. I just brushed it off, chalking it up to the wind rustling the leaves or something, but it didn't sound like wind hitting leaves. It was different. I stopped walking, and when I did, I heard the sound 2 more times, quickly, and then nothing. This kind of unnerved me, because it almost sounded like something stepping on the leaves. But I simply brushed this aside too, because it could have been an animal or something. As I kept walking though, I started thinking about what animal would be walking that close to me. Keep in mind, it was dark, and in my area of the US, the only nocturnal animal that might walk that close to a person would be a coyote. And really, the ones in my area are pretty timid, so I ruled this out. I thought that I was just feeling unnerved because I was alone in the dark, in the woods, etc. But as I thought more about it, and more about the sound, I realized why it had made me so uneasy. It sounded like someone or something trying to follow me by mimicking my footsteps, just like in the movies. with a person will hear 2 extra footsteps from someone after they stop. This thought begins to make me a little more uneasy. Is there some person following me? I've heard stories about things like that. Again, I just shrugged it off, or tried to anyway. I got to the part of the walk, back to the parking lot where you would have to pass under a canopy of trees, meaning you're surrounded by darkness. I still felt uneasy, almost scared, and I just didn't know why. I told myself to quit being stupid and to just walk, but I could still hear the sound. I was walking under this dark canopy, when all of a sudden, it hit me. That shivering sensation down your spine, the one I always hear about in every scary story before something bad happens. With this shiver comes this horrible, horrible sense, this certainty that something's not right. I am not alone. There is something next to me in the woods, and it's gonna get me. That I'm gonna die out here and never be found. Needless to say, I'm getting this feeling in the middle of the woods, in the dark, and it scared the ever-living crap out of me. I started panicking, wanting to run as hard as I could to just book it out of there. But this weird sense just told me that I shouldn't, and that I needed to just keep walking. I didn't feel dumb anymore for being scared. I just wanted to get out of there. But I kept walking, albeit faster, and as far to the right of the road as I could, to get away from the sound. I came to a fork on the road. It led to a part of the property, and that meant there was a break in the dense woods next to me, an opening. I felt the sense that if I got there, thing following me wouldn't be able to grow in the open. If I could just get to that point, I'd be okay. My dread and panic were just growing. I felt like something would jump out and grab me at any moment, but nothing ever did. I made it to the fork in the road. When I did, I shined my light back behind me and saw something. It was near some type of thin brush type plant, so it kind of looked like a plant, but it wasn't. I almost felt that this thing wanted to blend in, that it wanted me to think it was a plant, but it wasn't. I only saw it for a second. Because of all that point, I was ready to just turn around and hurriedly run away. I told my dad about it, but he shrugged it off, so I did too for a while. I've looked up things that might do this, and still don't know what this was. A result that came up almost immediately was a creature called the Hide Behind, but I've still got no clue. The only reason I think something seriously happened to me is because of the weird feeling that just suddenly came over me. And when I went back to that spot where I saw the shape of the plant, there wasn't a plant there. On that night I was walking out, something else definitely was there. To start things off, I am 14 now, but this took place a week before my 14th birthday. My parents were divorced, and my dad just moved into his new house a few months prior. He moved into the Rockies from the plains of Colorado, so he could be closer to work. You see, before this he had to take a 2-hour drive every day up the mountains to get to work, where he would have 11-hour shifts, and then drive back. He was a cop and had just gotten back to work after 8 months from his second major back injury. He ended up suing workers' comp and got a decent sum of money from that. So after a few months, when Christmas rolled around, he got me my brother AR-15s. I know what you were thinking, but we have grown up around guns and wouldn't think twice about seeing guns laying around the house. We enjoyed Christmas Day, and when nighttime rolled around, we went to our rooms and had the guns in our rooms as we slept. Now, before I tell you this next part, you must know that there are a lot of nut jobs out where I live in the mountains here. Also, my room has 2 windows, one to the left of me and one to the head of my bed. Anyways, I awoke in the middle of the night. Mind you, that I am in a deep sleep, and it is almost impossible to wake me up without shaking me. Immediately, something felt off, so I just stayed still and tried listening to what was going on, while pretending I was asleep. I was facing the window to the left of me, where I could see the forest out my window. Then I heard it. The lightest tap on the window I was facing. If I wasn't listening, I wouldn't have heard it. I couldn't see anything that could be making that sound, so I just watched and listened. About a minute later, I heard the tap again, followed by crunching of compact snow. Then I saw it. Behind a tree about 20 feet from my window, I saw two glowing eyes peer out. About 30 seconds later, I saw the arm of someone break off a branch and throw it at my window. Not wanting the person to know I was awake, I slowly slid off the other end of my bed and grabbed my AR-15. I loaded a magazine into it. My adrenaline was pumping because the nearest house was at least a quarter-mile away, and we were deep in the woods. Not wanting the intruder to know I was awake, I didn't charge the charging handle because of how loud it was. I put my phone in my shirt and texted my dad that someone is to the east of the house, and immediately after that, I heard the sliding glass door open above me. I saw my dad's flashlight on his AR-15 light up the area. The guy ran, and I could see he was wearing nothing but underwear and boots. My dad gave chase, but after going a mile into the woods and searching for about an hour barefoot and in shorts in the snowy woods of the Rockies, he gave up. After he texted someone on duty at the time and searching the surrounding woods, all they found was a shirt and a candle on a tree branch. This happened in the Appalachian Mountains of northeastern Pennsylvania about a year ago from now. I was camping with some friends at a private campground. We were going to enjoy the weekend at the campsite, and when I got there, I decided to pitch my tent. My friends were kind of loud at night, so I chose to set up my tent across the campsite, near a small pond. The area I had my tent in was a small bit of land that had the pond on my left and a creek on my right, so it was almost like a land bridge between the two bodies of water. When it had gotten to the time for me to go to sleep for the night, I walked to my tent and went to sleep. My tent was by itself across the campsite, because I like my privacy. I went to bed, and boy, I was awoken later in the night. I wasn't sure what time it was when I woke up, but it was still dark out. If I were to guess, I'd say it was around 4 in the morning or so. I put my head back down to go back to sleep, but I was beginning to hear some loud footsteps approaching from the direction of the creek. I listened to them get louder as whatever it was got closer. It wasn't an animal with 4 legs, like a bear or a deer, because the footsteps were in sets of 2. Footsteps were eventually right near my tent, and then they stopped. Then I heard it start sniffing the air around me for what felt like hours. I was terrified because I had no clue what was right by my tent. I just stayed still through the hopes that it wouldn't hear me moving. I sat there hoping it would just walk away until it ran back to where it came from. After about an hour, I went to my friends' tents to find them all asleep. It couldn't have been one of my friends because whatever it was ran in the opposite direction of the tents, and I would have heard it walk towards my friends' tents. In the morning, I found the grass near my tent patted down, as if something heavy had been standing there for a while. I never experienced anything like that since, and I still don't know what it could have been. I'm a 17-year-old male who lives in a small town in the middle of a forested area. I have had a bunch of things that have happened to me. But the story I'm about to share has haunted me and my friend for many years. And since the following is going to be a few different events, I'm going to tell them in the order that they happened, over a time span of 4 months. I'm an exploring kind of person. I love horror and rush of adrenaline. I believe in the paranormal, and I have a close friend who does the same. We spent a lot of time together, out walking on old railroad tracks and talking about life just winding down. We're really close, and I see him as my brother. Considering how we've known each other our entire lives, let's just call him W, just to simplify things. There's this old hospital that lies on the outskirts of town, just by the woods. It's been shut down for probably 60 plus years now, and has been pretty much abandoned. Me and W usually cross the place when we're on our walks, and often end up just talking about it, and all the rumor it has. Since supposedly, people have died there in both before and after it shut down, and it's rumored that it was a mental asylum as well, so it's a pretty creepy area. For the following to make sense, I'm going to explain how the place is laid out. Picture a lower capital N. The top part is where the entrance is. The back is where the 3 wings are, leaving 2 gaps between the wings. It was a late summer night, and the sun had just started to set. Our summer break was almost over, and the night had started to get a lot more darker this time around. We were circling this place, which wasn't as easy as you think. There's a lot of scrap and old tires and a lot of other stuff laying around. And since this place was unkept, we were walking around in waist-high grass. We were just joking around, trying to scare ourselves by sharing thoughts about how someone was probably living in there, staring at us. But that fantasy surely got more intriguing when we started to knock on a door we found just 'cause we could. As we both went silent, we heard a knock come from inside. This got us quite interested, as we aren't easily scared. We stuck around, knocking on different locations, and at times heard knocks back, usually in the set of 3, in a rapid succession. That was what got us hooked in the first place, so we kept coming back, and finally decided to try to find a way inside. One night, we found an old porch that was on the back of this place, between 2 of the wings that had been there and abandoned. We were having a hushed conversation as the activity of the place had picked up, and trying to discuss how we were going to get up there, and just decided that we were going to try to find this old fire ladder that was hanging about 3 meters off the ground. It was on the other wing, and as we were going up, we both heard something. The sounds of footsteps in the grass. Note that the 2 of us were standing in one of the corners inside the gap, so we had one way out, and that was towards the corner of the building. We both went quiet, and both turned our head towards the corners that led out to the high unkept grass, and just as we did, the sound stopped. Whatever it was, you could hear that it was bipedal, and it was definitely trying to sneak up on us while we were talking, and was just around the corner. We looked at each other, and W said, following the exact words to me, after barely a second of processing, said, "Leg it," and we did. We ran to the opposite end of the opening, expecting to see something or someone following us when we came into the clearing, but we didn't. But that didn't stop us from running. But the one thing that stopped me was when W, who was right behind me, tripped on an old tire and fell into the high grass. Luckily, he wasn't hurt, so after he got up, we took quick off again, and just before jogging the hell out of there, we looked back into the woods to see what seemed to be eyes glowing and looking back at us. We kept going there, and following what happened a late afternoon during the fall, as we had just planned that we were going to go in. Considering the ladder was unreachable from the ground, we were planning on our next visit. The ladder went up to the roof, to the 3-story tall building, and went right past a window which was missing the frame and glass. So if you got up, you could easily just slip inside by stretching out your foot. We were standing at the bottom, looking up at the window, And since the building had a risk of having the floor collapse, we were going to throw something up there through the window to see if we could hear it land on the floor. And since you'd be able to tell if it fell down one story, the following is a small detail which became horrifying to us later on. You could see the stairs just barely through the window from our angle. I had just picked up a piece of wood and thrown it through the window, and sure enough, we heard it land on the floor. But barely 2 seconds after the first thud, we also heard 2 thuds from the stairs as if someone was walking down, as if something came to see what had made the noise. This creeped us out a bit, so we stuck around a while before starting to decide that we were going to leave for the day, when we heard something from out in the woods, which sounded like something drifting or burning rubber with a car. This wasn't impossible, considering how people recently started to get their driver's license and wanted to act tough in their old beat-up Volvos. W seemed to be a bit skeptical, and I did as well, as that noise kept on going for at least 20 seconds flat. If it was something burning rubber, they wouldn't be doing it for that long. And it also stopped so abruptly, like it just cut off, before continuing for maybe about 5 or 10 more seconds. But that made me so sure it wasn't someone acting cool, was the fact that it started sounding more like human with time, like a girl just screaming. But for that long and that loud, we got way too unnerved to stick around when we started hearing the rustling in the woods, so we left for that day. And the following is the last visit we ever made to that place. It was a rainy autumn night. It was quite dark and we were heading out there again. We were decently prepared with flashlights, a rope, and gloves to give us a better grip and fully charged phones. The plan was to use the thick rope he had brought, which had a small loop on the end, to get around one of the bottom steps of the ladder, and then pull the rope through the loop so we could climb up and reach the ladder. It took us about 15 minutes to get the rope up and around, and also down and get the rope secured. This whole time, we were felt watched and unnerved, like something didn't want us there. We felt trapped, like something was going to come running at us from behind, our only exit. The cold rain made the climb up hard, as we were getting rigid and the rope was slippery. But I got up, and the moment I did, I felt isolated for some reason. The climb to the window was probably a few meters, which meant that if I fell, I could seriously injure myself on either all the broken glass or the old scrap. But what terrified me the most was the moment I stepped inside. It was pitch black, and this overwhelming weight came over me, and I felt weak in my entire body. Shining the flashlight along, I saw old needles, dark brownish spots in the floor and walls, a bloody rag, and rusty, old stairs. Also, there were 2 log hallways on both to the left and right, that seemed to go on forever. Something my mom was convincing me not to turn around and look down the hall. Because if I did, I could tell it was not out of fear that I would see something terrible. I did my best to try to get W up to climb up and join me, but he refused, and I don't blame him. I didn't stay in there very long. I soon climbed down and we left, leaving the rope. I felt dread stuck in me with furtive. It just felt like days. I couldn't stop feeling this creepy feeling. It's never left me, and I always feel like something is following me. This was last year and it still haunts us. I started wanting to go back there, to go back inside, but W refuses to go back to that place again. Doing some research, I came to the conclusion of it being a demon that is latched on to me, as they apparently want to get to their victims back to the place that they latched on to get stronger. I've also went back there during the daylight a few times, and I tried to collect the rope, but it was clean cut right where the loop was, leaving a small knot. I remember that it was roughly 3 to 4 meters up in the air, and the cut was pretty much a perfect one. We still talk about this, and sometimes see lights in the window of that old place when we pass at night. Power was shut down and were feared 50 years ago, so this is really weird. One time, while driving in the middle of nowhere in France with a friend, the whole night just felt so eerie for some reason. I won't get into all the prior details, but when we parked in front of our hotel, it was strangely quiet and dark. All of a sudden, a group of people in a trance-like state started walking out of the woods from different areas all around the parking lot. The woods were just about a foot away from where we parked our car. It was so creepy and intense. The first person to come out of the woods was a lady. She didn't even acknowledge us as she walked right in front and beside our car. She was so tranced out. More people hide in the woods than you would think or imagine. Another day, I was walking in the woods in my backyard. I often walked alone in there feeling safe and solace. Once I was pretty far in, I turned around a bend and was scared out of my wits to see a naked man just laying there on the side of the path. He must have been slinking his way through the woods to get there before I did, or maybe he was just laying there for a long time, just waiting for someone to see him or walk into him. I ran like a bat out of hell, thinking he was going to kill me. It's safe to say there are a lot of creepy people as well as creepy creatures lurking out in the woods just outside of our homes. Before I tell you my story, I must give you a bit of background. I live in the state of Idaho in the US. I work on a farm and live in a very small town and live just down the road, about an hour from where this happened. But when I heard a story from a neighbor, curiosity got the best of me. My friend Bill told me the story of the water babies. We were at my house in the garage. Bill was talking with my dad about fixing something in the house. The talk moved on to hunting stories, then stories about seeing weird things in the woods. My dad has a ton of stories like that handed down from my grandpa. After a few stories, Bill told the tale like this. You see, the story behind the water babies is that two main native tribes in the area, the Shoshone and the Bannock, or as they call themselves, the Shobans, would perform an ancient ritual. Nobody remembers any specifics of the ritual. It's lost to history, but the purpose is fairly well known. Whenever a set of twins were born, the Shobans would take the babies to the marsh where the Blackfoot and Snake Rivers joined. They would throw the babies in the water, and the one that floated was kept, and the ritual was ended. The belief is that the twin is good and the other twin is evil, and they believed that the good one would float to the surface, but this meant a lot of babies drowned, whether one or both the twins died. Anyways, it is said that if you drive to Tilden Bridge, which overlooks the smaller of the two rivers, and shut your car off, you will hear odd noises, small thuds and thumps, as if something is crawling all over your car. I have heard of water babies before, and seen the Tilden Bridge, but I never joined and put the two together in my mind. After Bill told us what water babies were, he told me that after his brother experienced the noises and his friends, they drove away from the bridge on a dirt road. The next morning, Bill's brother got up to find his car not only caked in dust, but covered in small hand footprints. I scoffed at this. It's a fairly lesser-known local legend, although old-timers are dying out, so it's not as well known anymore, and I never believed it. Until one night 2 years ago. A group of me and my friends. I was the one driving, and my cousin in the cab, and my girlfriend in the middle front seat, her best friend in the passenger, and the other two girls were in the back. We wanted to spook out the girls, and in all honesty, we all were pretty creeped out as it was. We told them we were looking for ghosts and it was a moonlit night, so if we did see anything, we would be kind of screwed. This amped up the fear of the unknown factor big time. I was driving, so I parked and turned my pickup off the middle of the bridge. It is a rarely used bridge due to it being in the middle of nowhere, so I felt comfortable parking on the bridge. We sat in the darkness for a minute expecting something to freak us out. The car was full of us kids being loud and goofing off, so it wasn't too creepy. After a minute or two, we decided to leave nothing, because it was too spooky and nothing was happening. The mist of the river rolled over my truck's windows, which made everything look more horrifying. To tell you the truth, we all decided to do something else, so I turned the key and nothing happened. The girls thought I was playing around and telling me to push it in the clutch or just joking. Idiots, let's go. My girlfriend told me, not funny, okay? Just go. I told them that the car wasn't automatic and had no clutch. The girls grew quiet, and I saw them go pale in the moonlight. I tried for about a half an hour to get this car to start, but it just wouldn't work. I was too scared to get out and pop the hood. Everyone was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. I kept turning the key, and my girlfriend's best friend in the passenger seat had her window down a small bit. Through the small slits of the window, we heard a baby screaming not too far from the river bottoms. Mind you, we were miles from the nearest town or any farms, so it couldn't have been some baby a little ways off, because we were in the middle of nowhere like I said before. We were literally like a half an hour from the nearest town. We then started hearing soft thuds and bumps of the roof and hood of the truck. We all freaked out after a few turns. The engine still wouldn't go, until we heard a thud and felt the truck move forward a bit. I turned the key one last time and it started up. We pulled out of there as fast as we could over the dirt road. We were all done with doing anything else that night, so I took everyone home. When everyone was dropped off at home, I drove back to my house, parked the truck in the driveway, and ran inside. The next morning, my dad yelled at me for letting kids climb over the truck during the night. I told him I wasn't even near any kids last night. He led me to the driveway to the truck and said, "See all the hand and footprints all over?" The truck was covered in dust from the dirt road, and as he pointed to it, I noticed small handprints and footprints on the hood and in the bed. It's been 2 years, but I will never go back to Tilden Bridge again. I have experienced some weird crap in my life, but all I know is that I believe in Bill's story.